All right, this is the moderator. The time is 12:10, so I will go ahead and resume the recording.
This meeting is being recorded.
All right, thank you. I will call the meeting back to order. I have 12:10. And we will move on to item I, presentation by California State Water Resources Control Board. In two parts, review and discuss exam process, content areas, and requirements of landscape architects for qualified stormwater pollution prevention plan developer certification. And part two, review and possible action on preliminary staff draft of the statewide construction general permit reissuance. And I will ask Stacy Townsend to reintroduce us to this agenda item.
Okay, so yeah, just a reminder that at the November 8th, 2019 committee meeting, the members discussed the QSD certification requirements and process for landscape architects as a result of receiving correspondence from a licensee regarding the QSD certification. The committee members expressed further interest and requested a presentation on the extent of the QSD certification training program, requirements to become QSD certified, importance of being QSD certified, and how landscape architects can become QSD certified. A presentation was provided by Brandon at the September 4th, 2020 LATC meeting. After that presentation, the committee members expressed interest in receiving additional information on the examination process and the subject areas of the exam, as well as stormwater requirements of landscape architects for QSD certification. So Brandon is here today to provide a presentation on that additional information, as well as the proposed language amending the construction general permit. So Brandon, whenever you're ready.
Oh, perfect.
Sorry.
Go ahead. And share this. Oops. Is everyone seeing my screen okay?
Yes.
Perfect. So good afternoon, Landscape Architects Technical Committee, and thank you for having me here today to present an overview of the Qualified SWIP Developer and Practitioner exam. I'm glad to follow up from our previous meeting. So today I'll be using some acronyms throughout both of our presentations. So I'll just review some of these right now. The first would be SWIP, Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan, QSD and QSP, which stand for the Qualified SWIP Developer and Practitioners, CGP, which is the Construction Stormwater General Permit, Casqua, which is the California Stormwater Quality Association, and OWP, the Office of Water Programs at Sacramento State. So just a quick overview of this presentation. Will consist of a brief summary of the QSD and QSP program, which I covered in a previous meeting, details on the exam, and then some key takeaways. After the presentation, there'll be time for some discussion. So the QSD QSP program was created with the adoption of the 2009 Construction Stormwater General Permit. The permit requires a qualified SWIP developer to develop the stormwater pollution prevention plan, which details the construction site's management of pollutant sources and construction activities with regard to stormwater. The qualified SWIP practitioner, or QSP, is more of the boots on the ground role who implements the elements of the SWIP to comply with the requirements of the Construction Stormwater General Permit. Recognizing that QSDs and QSPs are not entry-level positions, the training team, or the Construction General Permit training team, determined a number of underlying registrations or certifications to serve as a prerequisite for the training program. And licensure as a California registered landscape architect is one of them. Unlike California licensed professional engineers and geologists, landscape architects are actually required to take the QSD QSP training course and pass an exam to earn the QSD or QSP certifications. Casqua and the Office of Water Programs at Sacramento State are partners in administrating the QSD and QSP program for the State Water Board. So there are 4 essential steps to earning the QSD QSP certification. First would be to take the training course offered by a trainer of record, which is listed on the Casqua website. Then to register to take the QSD and QSP exam through the Office of Water Programs. This is a $125 fee. The applicant would then take and pass the QSD or QSP exam with at least a score of 70% or higher, and then provide underlying information on the underlying certification or registration that they have as a prerequisite. So you can take the training for the QSD, QSP, and the exam prior to having your prerequisite. And more information on this can be found on the Casqua website. So here's a little bit of detail on what the QSB or how the QSP and QSD exams are administered. They are hosted online through the Office of Water Programs website and are open book. So test takers may actually refer to the Construction Stormwater General Permit in its full text in order to answer some of the questions of the exam. And they're also allowed to bring a non-programmable calculator. The entire test would be 3 hours long, with the QSP exam being 2 hours and the QSD exam being an additional 1 hour. In total, it would be 127 questions, with 88 for the qualifying or for the QSP and 88 for the QSD. Or sorry, 39 for the QSD. And now for the subject areas. These subject areas actually mirror the content of the QSD, QSP training courses. So they include the regulations, erosion processes and sediment control, project planning and site assessment, SWIP development and permit registration documents, SWIP implementation, construction site monitoring, reporting, and project closeout. Unfortunately, I do not have access to all of the questions that were asked on the exam. However, Office of Water Programs and Casqua strongly recommend that the QSD and QSB candidates read through the entirety of the permit, even prior to taking a training course, as all of the questions are based on requirements found in the permit itself. So familiarity with where things are in the permit and just the general layout will improve the candidate's ability to swiftly answer questions throughout the exam, as well as ask their trainers of record or instructors during the training course for clarification on some of the requirements. And on the slide here, we actually indicate the 3 sections of the QSD, of the training program that are QSD specific topics. And so those would be project planning and site assessment, SWIP development and permit registration documents, and project closeout. So key takeaways. Let's see. California registered landscape architects are expected to have fundamental knowledge of stormwater management, such as erosion and sediment controls, hydrology, pollutant source controls, and soil science. The QSD QSP training program is designed to orient their experience towards complying with the requirements of the statewide construction stormwater general permit. The State Water Board and Casqua value the experience and perspective of landscape architects in addressing stormwater issues, and they've been noted to often achieve improved project outcomes when participating in the design of stormwater projects. And so while I want this to be a key takeaway from today's overview, I do want to note that this language actually stems from our partners with Office of Water Programs and Casqua, and they truly value the insight that landscape architects bring to projects. And with that, we can do questions and discussions. John, are you on mute?
Sorry, I guess I am. Any questions from the committee? Okay. I assume that this is not the conclusion of your presentation. If I remember looking in the package, there's actually 2 parts to your presentation.
That is correct. So this is pretty much the conclusion of the first part, kind of just the overview on the actual exam process for candidates that are wishing to pursue a QSD and QSP certification.
Right. I do have a couple questions, but I think I'll hold off until you're done.
Okay.
They're more general in nature.
All right.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
Sure.
I guess at this point in time, I will ask if the public has any questions or comments they'd like to make on Brandon's initial presentation.
All right, this is the moderator. And give me 1 second while I get that Q&A feature open. There we go. And also the instructions. Members of the public, if you would like to make a public comment, please click that Q&A icon at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen. And it looks like we do have a request for comment from Stephanie. Stephanie, I will be unmuting your microphone now.
Thank you very much, Brandon. I have a couple of questions on the qualification. Is there a landscape architect on the water board?
On the actual water board, I am not sure, but I do not believe so.
But I do believe there's an engineer, correct?
Correct. Board member Tam Doduk is a registered engineer.
So you told me, it's what I heard here, so please clarify if I heard correctly. If you are a registered engineer or a surveyor, you do not have to take the exam to become certified.
Sort of correct. And registered professional engineers and engineering geologists, as well as I think geologists, do not have to go through the QSD and QSP training program, nor do they have to take the test. They are able to self-register as qualified SWIP developers and practitioners.
Can you tell me the reasoning for this? Is it based upon the education that is provided in these 2 professions for licensure? Because I'm just very curious. I know a lot about licensure, and I'm curious how this determination came about.
So I think it was way before my time of joining the water boards, but back in 2009 or 2010 was when we created this this program, and I think we were met with some feedback from the California Board of Professional Engineers, Land Surveyors, and Geologists that they should not need to go through the QSD and QSP training program because they have that experience already in their as part of their licensure.
So it was a political maneuvering on the board's part, and probably the engineering profession. So my question is, what is considered the qualifications from those licensing boards that are specific to those and not specific to landscape architects?
I'm not exactly familiar with the specific logic. I just think it's likely because a lot of the professional engineers and geologists are participating in the design efforts of a lot of the stormwater programs.
However, they, as you noted, have not been doing green design for years. This is something that has been happening with landscape architects. So I would say participation in design is also part of what landscape architects have been doing longer than engineers. I'm an educator, so I'm torturing you for this reason.
Mhm. And if it's found that there really isn't a significant difference between the experience and education that the engineers and geologists receive versus landscape architects, um, we could potentially make the change to have landscape architects also self-certify. I would have to talk to our Office of Chief Counsel and kind of look at the history of why engineers and geologists are treated differently. And one thing to note about the self-certifications is, and kind of one of the important takeaways from this discussion is that the QSD and QSP training programs really help professionals gain familiarity and orient their experience towards compliance with the permit regulations or requirements. And throughout the implementation of the current construction stormwater general permit, the 2009 permit, we have found that a lot of the self-certifying QSDs and QSPs are, although they're quite capable of designing a best management practice implementation plan, a lot of them do so without regard to the specific requirements in the permit. And so um, I think it was almost illegal, or it might have been a legal case that resulted in the engineers and geologists being able to self-certify. Because the state water board prefers that they do go through the training program, but the board of professional engineers did not.
Balanced it, yes.
Mhm.
So in some instances, I'm going to be so bold to say it sounds to me like a self-preserving reason as opposed to dealing with the health, safety, and welfare of California, because qualifications are varied among engineers. There are engineers who can become structural, civil, but they're all going through the general engineering. So the real application of it, even hydrologic ones, might be more qualified than anyone else.
Mhm.
So, not that I'm disrespecting the license. I'm just saying that I don't think the license is any more qualified than our license for self-certification. And I do think that self-certification is not serving the public health, safety, and welfare.
Mhm.
That is an issue I totally agree with the California Water Board on. So I don't know if there is any effort on the water board to change this, to make it seriously more equitable in the application of EMPs. Just a question.
At this time, there is no proposal to make a change to the engineering and geologist self-certifications. However, and we will talk about this a little bit in the next presentation, there will be an opportunity for the public to provide comments on the proposed draft in the near future. And so that would be a good opportunity to raise this concern to our board members and say that it is inequitable and that perhaps we should reconsider.
It would require a political appetite to do that of the board. So that's interesting. But because of the new green push that both Governor Brown and Newsom have done, I think it's probably a ripe time to push it. Thank you for that very much for your help.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, this is the moderator. It looks like there are no further requests for public comment. Would you like me to close that Q&A panel? John, I believe you are muted.
Mr. Chairman, I believe you're muted.
Sorry about that. Yes, you can close the public comment. John Roshinsky and Brandon, I guess I'll go ahead and ask my couple of questions that I have, and these are more general. Once someone becomes certified under this program, how do they typically present their qualifications? Do they use a designation like QSD or QSP, like any of the other professional designations? How does the public, I guess my question is how does the public know that a person is actually qualified or certified to do this work?
Mm-hmm. So there's a couple of ways. You know, like a professional engineering license or or any licensure, you can add the PE or PG or after your name, like in your signature. That's completely acceptable. As far as official purposes go, those who self-certify have to do so through our stormwater multiple application and report tracking system, otherwise known as SMARTS. The self-certifiers will enter their valid licensure, so their PG or PE in SMARTS, and that will be that'll generate a qualified SWIP developer or practitioner specific number. Usually it's the same number as their license. And so that's one area where a client who needs their services can look for confirmation that they are a QSD or QSP. The other area would be the Office of Water Programs website and potentially Casqua, or although I think Casqua refers to the Office of Water Programs website. They have a database of everyone who has taken the exams, passed it, and continually renews their license, I think on a every other year basis. And so there are two separate databases.
All right, thank you. And my second question is, are you aware of any issues that have come up in regards to insurers, say for errors and emissions or anything like that, that have come up in regards to people that do this work and, lawsuits being brought for in regards to professional qualifications, that type of thing?
Not off the top of my head. I think there might have been one that came across my desk a couple years back in the San Diego region, where it was either the QSD or the QSP was cited. I think it was the QSP was cited as not implementing BMPs or just neglecting the site in general, and so they were met with some litigation. I think that litigation basically said that they are no longer allowed to practice as a QSP. But I'm not super familiar with the legal processes behind that.
Okay.
I do want to add that we are discussing this at the water boards, along with our partners at Casqua and OWP. We're trying to figure out what the best process is for instances where a QSP or QSD just aren't performing to our standards or expectations. The proposed permit is saying that the state water board can rescind the certification but we're not technically the administering body or authority. Casqua would be. And I don't know if Casqua has the resources to really assess on that level. And so I think the current approach has been to go for the underlying certifications. So if someone is, and it's tricky for the professional engineers and geologists because just because they're not upholding, the stormwater requirements doesn't necessarily mean that they're not qualified to be an engineer. But for other prerequisites such as the certified inspector ones or erosion and sediment control professionals, if they're not doing that, then you can go to like Enviros, or I believe is the issuing body for those, and complain that they aren't implementing things properly.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I was just curious if the insurers are reluctant to want to insure this work for obvious reasons, but it sounds like it's more on a case-by-case basis. So thank you. Let's see. So I guess, are you ready to move on to item 2? The review of possible action on a preliminary staff draft of the statewide construction general permit reissuance.
It's lengthy, I know.
Yeah. Okay.
Go ahead and let's see, share my content. Not quite seeing it pop up. Let's see. 1 second. Sorry. Okay. Is it visible?
It's getting there.
Getting there.
Okay.
Alrighty. So this will be the continuation of our discussion, part 2, proposed construction stormwater general permit reissuance update. And a lot of this will be review for anyone who has attended or watched our workshops last December on this proposed reissuance. However, I did try to include some focus on QSD and QSP specific requirements because that relates to potential responsibilities for landscape architects.
This is the moderator. If I can interrupt real quick, Brandon, it looks like you have a dialog box in front of the presentation. It's showing like a little gray. It happens. Okay,
Is that does that fix it?
Yep.
Okay, that was the WebEx. I had it down there. So okay. Go ahead. Okay, a little bit of background on the permit. So the Federal Clean Water Act prohibits certain discharges of stormwater containing pollutants to or certain discharges to waters of the United States of stormwater containing pollutants, except those that are in compliance with a National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit, which the CGP is. So the State Water Board adopted the existing construction stormwater general permit in 2009 and amended it in 2010 and 2012. I think one of those amendments might have had to do with the Board of Professional Engineers and Land Surveyors and Geologists requesting that they be or that they're exempt from taking the exams. And so they adopted that in 2009 to regulate stormwater discharges associated with construction activities disturbing 1 or more acres. The existing construction general permit expired in September of 2014 and has been administratively extended until the adoption of a new construction stormwater general permit. We have learned quite a lot in the last 11 or 12 years of implementation of the current permit, and what has been working and what's not. Therefore, we're proposing a number of changes for the reissuance to address some of those implementation concerns. The primary topics that we'll be covering in today's workshop include total maximum daily load implementation requirements, passive treatment technology use requirements, the notice of non-applicability criteria, notice of termination process revisions, implementation of the statewide water quality control plans, authorized dewatering activity requirements, as well as demolition activity requirements, sufficiently sensitive test methods rule, monitoring and reporting requirement revisions, and the removal of the bioassessment monitoring and rain event action plan requirements. So first up, we'll focus on the implementation of adopted total maximum daily loads. So total maximum daily loads are existing regulations that have gone through the public process at the regional water board level. And they are adopted into water quality control plans, which are basin plans that the regional water boards issue. And they address Clean Water Act 303D listed impaired water bodies. So if a certain water body is impaired for a given pollutant, that means it's affecting one of the beneficial uses of that water body. Total maximum daily loads are adopted by the Regional Water Board or the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. In some instances, the U.S. EPA decides to step in and draft the total maximum daily load document themselves. A total maximum daily load is the sum of allowable loads of a certain or single pollutant from all contributing point sources, non-point sources, plus the contribution of background sources, and then there's also a margin of safety factored in. Total maximum daily loads are not self-implementing and must be implemented through the requirements of permits or other water board actions. The existing construction stormwater general permit already includes a list of applicable total maximum daily loads. However, this general permit reissuance intends to update that list and add more implementable requirements, so TMDL specific implementation requirements. Total maximum daily loads assigned something called a waste load allocation to point sources such as construction sites. A waste load allocation is the maximum pollutant load from each point source that can be discharged to a water body. Stormwater discharges associated with construction activities, as regulated by this general permit, are generally considered point sources of pollutions and therefore have waste load allocations assigned to them. The regional water boards provided state water board staff with a list of 88 total maximum daily loads to consider incorporating into this general permit reissuance. State water board staff reviewed and evaluated the applicability of the total maximum daily loads and ultimately decided to exclude 20 of those total maximum daily loads from incorporation into the reissuance if they met one of the two conditions. And so the first condition would be a waste load allocation was not assigned to construction stormwater dischargers, or two, the total maximum daily load did not identify any specific requirements that the construction stormwater dischargers would have to implement. Therefore, this general permit is proposing to incorporate implementation requirements for 68 total maximum daily loads. The applicable total maximum daily loads and their implementation requirements are located in attachment H of the permit reissuance. Due to the variety of pollutants and the waste load allocations assigned to address them, staff have developed multiple implementation strategies consistent with the assumptions and requirements of the total maximum daily loads. The intent was to streamline compliance by leveraging and modifying existing permit requirements where possible. So existing requirements such as conducting a pollutant source assessment, source controls, soil loss modeling, non-visible pollutant monitoring, and reporting are the basis of our implementation requirements for total maximum daily loads. There are four categories of total maximum daily load implementation requirements, and those are these bluish squares on the screen. The first would be to simply comply with the general permit requirements where those have been identified as sufficient to comply with the waste load allocation. And so technically all four of these categories still have to comply with general permit requirements. The second would be compliance with the erosion and sediment controls in the permit, paired with soil loss modeling to demonstrate compliance with mass-based waste load allocations, which are generally tied to sediment discharges. And then the third and fourth are more monitoring-based compliance strategies. And so we have numeric action levels and numeric effluent limitations. Both of these are considered, or I guess they're essentially concentration-based waste load allocations, where a discharger will go to their discharge location and collect a sample of their stormwater, and then assess them and compare them to the numeric action levels and numeric effluent limitations. If the stormwater was in exceedance of one of these levels, or if it was in exceedance of a numeric action level, the discharger would have to perform corrective actions and reassess the stormwater discharge to see if they're below that level. If the discharger exceeded a numeric effluent limitation, that is actually a violation of the permit and the Clean Water Act, and therefore the discharger would be subject to minimum mandatory penalties, or mandatory minimum penalties. Always get the M switched up. Alrighty. And so this slide's kind of how we envision the total maximum daily load implementation requirements impacting qualified SWIP developers and qualified SWIP practitioners. Because the qualified SWIP developers are probably going to be hired on by the discharger to determine if their site has any applicable total maximum daily loads, and then determine how many or what best management practices will address the pollutants of concern. So step one is to determine responsible discharger status. Does the project discharge into a total maximum daily load watershed or water body? And the State Water Board will be preparing a map tool to help guide dischargers to determine this. And there's actually already an existing map tool for the industrial stormwater general permit, which is shown on to the right. It will be the discharger's responsibility to verify if the project discharges to TMDL watersheds or water bodies. Step two, the QSD will perform a site-specific pollutant source assessment. Does the site have the sources of the TMDL pollutants? Is there potential for those pollutants to even be present or exposed to stormwater? If not, then the implementation requirements will not apply to this construction site. However, if it is found that there is a potential for the pollutant to enter stormwater or come into contact with stormwater, then they would have to start complying with the implementation requirements in attachment H. And so the last step would be to, after identifying that you discharge to a watershed, that you have the pollutant on your site, is to refer to attachment H for the applicable implementation requirements specific to that pollutant water body combination. And so those are all listed in that attachment. Alrighty, we'll be moving on to the passive treatment technology use requirements. So passive treatment technology basically is the use of treatment chemicals outside of a active treatment system, which is an enclosed computerized system with pumps, filters, and real-time controls. Oftentimes there's automatic sampling devices within an active treatment system. Passive treatment differs in that the chemicals are directly applied to land and or water, and do not necessarily have these computerized controls to prevent the discharge of the treatment chemicals, which in certain concentrations may be toxic to aquatic life. There are a variety of different treatment chemicals, both cation and anion exchanging chemicals, and cation treatment chemicals have been found to be toxic to aquatic life. I believe that they adhere to fish gills and hinder the ability for the fish to absorb oxygen, which is, not good. And so the proposed passive treatment technology use requirements are actually prohibiting the use of cation and limiting it to anion type chemicals. That said, passive treatment chemicals can vary in active ingredients, dosing amounts, and application methods. So dischargers should be familiar with the chemicals' characteristics by reviewing the safety data sheets of those chemicals and adhering to manufacturer instructions when applying them. The US EPA and several other states have started regulating the use of passive treatment technologies, and California would like to follow suit as well. When developing these requirements, we actually worked with a lot of industry professionals, both from Casqua and just vendors of passive treatment technologies, and they helped us to develop these requirements for monitoring, application, and reporting. And in this picture, you can see the difference in water quality as far as turbidity goes, or the sediment goes, when you add these chemicals. Essentially, what happens is the sediment particles will all kind of join together or bind together, and then be heavy enough that they settle out of the water column, and therefore resulting in cleaner water. That said, I mean, in the clear water, you may not be able to determine that an excessive amount of the treatment chemical still remains. So there's going to be some residual monitoring requirements as part of this. Okay, so essentially what we're requiring is that the discharger assign a QSD that is knowledgeable in the use of passive treatment systems, and as currently proposed, they are supposed to be present during all applications of these treatment chemicals. And so the QSD will be preparing a passive treatment plan to determine application rates, dosing, discharge locations, and inspection frequencies of the passive treatment systems. And that requires the QSD to have some fundamental knowledge and of chemistry and physical properties, as well as water quality monitoring and testing procedures. The QSD may also train qualified stormwater, the QSD may also train the QSP to assist them with passive treatment requirement implementation. So even though we did work with professional or industry professionals to develop these requirements, we received a number of comments during the informal staff draft release and during the workshop that the requirements to have a QSD and QSP so tied to the implementation of passive treatment technology would be a little bit onerous, and that the QSD and QSP might not have that specific skill set or knowledge to effectively comply with the requirements. And so we're actually in the midst of revising the permit to rely less on our qualified stormwater professionals and more on the manufacturers and the contractors that are out here applying these chemicals. All right. Next up, the proposed notice of non-applicability criteria. The California Water Code allows a person or entity to claim that they are not required to obtain coverage under the construction stormwater general permit through a notice of non-applicability. The proposed permit defines the requirements for a discharger submitting a notice of non-applicability to the water boards as any site that is hydrologically disconnected from waters of the United States. So the discharger would have to certify and submit through our report tracking system, SMARTS, a technical justification prepared by a licensed geologist demonstrating that the site does not discharge to waters of the United States, and a document signed by the Regional Water Board executive officer or their delegate stating that the water board staff agrees with the discharger's determination that the site does not discharge to waters of the United States. As far as changes during our revision process are going, we received comments that the geologist is not the only professional capable of making this determination. Engineers are as well, and so we'll be adding that there. And there's always the caution of what waters of the United States actually means. So that definition is often debated at the US EPA level, and so the definitions can change depending on the administration. All right. Moving on to the notice of termination process. So a discharger, in order to end coverage under the construction stormwater general permit, must certify and submit to the water boards a complete notice of termination and obtain approval to end their permit coverage. The proposed permit includes requirements to expedite the approval process on behalf of the regional water board to reduce the financial burden on dischargers who have to continue complying even though they've submitted this notice of termination until it is actually approved by the regional water board. And so a common complaint during current implementation has been that the regional water boards take too long to approve a notice of termination, and this has resulted in BMPs having to be maintained, inspections having to be maintained, and annual fee payments having to be paid. So our proposal is to require that the discharger provide additional project-specific information as part of their notice of termination. And then that's kind of a trade-off with the regional water boards, hoping that they can use that information to expedite their review process and approve a permit. And the trade-off is notices of termination will be approved within 30 days if the regional water board has not accepted the notice of termination for review or has not returned it or approved it. So if they haven't taken some sort of action on the notice of termination, then it will be automatically approved within 30 days. Okay. One of the, okay. So since the construction stormwater general permit was last reissued in 2009, the state water board has adopted adopted several, or maybe just a couple, state water quality control plans for oceanic waters as well as inland surface waters, enclosed bays, and estuaries. These water quality control plans function similarly to those adopted by the regional water boards, but apply to all of California instead of just those regions. These likewise, these regulations, policies, and water quality standards established by the water quality control plans are implemented through other state water board orders, such as the construction stormwater general permit. The Ocean Plan, adopted in 2019, requires the implementation of monitoring requirements for dischargers directly discharging into ocean waters. The monitoring requirements of the construction stormwater general permit were assessed and determined to be compliant with the modeling provisions of and monitoring provisions of the Ocean Plan. Additionally, the Ocean Plan prohibits the discharge of stormwater associated with construction activities to areas of special biological significance, unless they are granted an exception. And there are requirements in Attachment I of the Construction General Permit that outline what those exception criteria are. Okay, so another new addition to the permit is the regulation of dewatering activity. The proposed permit defines and incorporates implementation requirements for for site dewatering activities, which aligns with the 2017 US EPA Construction Stormwater General Permit and expands on it. So they added a dewatering section to their permit. We added one as well, but we thought that their dewatering requirements were a little minimal and decided to expand on those. So dewatering discharges authorized by this permit include mechanical pumping or siphoning of non-potable water from excavations, trenches, foundations, vaults, groundwater, and groundwater that happens to accumulate in those as well. The discharger would essentially be required to comply with specific dewatering discharge prohibitions, regional water board requests, monitoring, and best management practices. Similarly, the US EPA included requirements for demolition activities. And essentially what we're trying to address here is that buildings or structures built in 1950 or between 1950 and 1990, I believe that's supposed to say 1980 actually, used PCB containing materials which are considered a threat to stormwater. And so what we're trying to do here is ensure that those demolition activities are contained and that they don't come into contact with stormwater and result in the discharge of PCBs, lead paint, asbestos, and other building materials that have since been determined to be hazardous. So implementation of a new federal sufficiently sensitive test method rule. The US EPA has finalized minor amendments to its Clean Water Act regulations to codify under the NPDES permitting program that that discharges that are analyzed via an analytical lab must comply with certain analytical methods and have a minimum level of quantification as part of those methods that are able to sufficiently sense pollutants at or below the applicable water quality criteria or permit limits. And so we've incorporated those into this permit as well. All right, so staff proposes revisions to the existing permits monitoring and reporting requirements as follows. The qualified SWIP developer and SWIP practitioners have increased requirements to actually be present on the site, mostly to conduct visual inspections and assess site conditions. The qualified SWIP developer and practitioner are required to do, on-site visual inspections at intervals that reflect potential changes to the construction site. And we received a little bit of feedback on that, that because construction sites are ever changing, they would prefer to have mandatory inspections on a routine schedule rather than when a construction changes phases from, say, grading to vertical construction. And we think that makes sense as well, and we are working on revising that language as well. The discharger must also collect stormwaters during as proposed in the preliminary staff draft. The discharger was supposed to collect stormwater samples during precipitation events that result in discharge. We also received comments on this that it's hard to determine when a site is discharging. You can't just look at your rain gauge and say, oh, I'm discharging today. And so we are reverting back to the previous definition of 0.5 inches and adding a time element to that as well. So it's going to be 0.5 inches or half an inch in a 24-hour period rather than just any discharge from the site. And this allows our dischargers to, one, have a signal to go do and trigger their inspections and their sampling, but it also provides enforcement on behalf of either third parties or the state water board or regional water boards to look back at records and say, like, hey, you mentioned that, or you noted in your inspection that it rains half an inch within this period and you didn't perform any samples. And enforce on that. Yeah. And the last two slides, I think, are proposed removal of bioassessment monitoring requirements. So the existing permit, the 2009 permit, contains bioassessment monitoring requirements intended to align with a biological integrity policy, essentially looking at invertebrates and aquatic life and seeing how construction stormwater discharges are impacting them. However, that policy is still under development. And so our staff has proposed to replace the bioassessment monitoring requirements, or remove them actually, and instead conduct studies through our surface water ambient monitoring program, to determine if there is a significant impact to water quality and biological integrity from these high risk construction projects. So essentially what we're doing is conducting these studies in-house instead of putting the responsibility on the discharger. And with these studies, the State Water Board could potentially adopt future reissuances that do include bioassessment or biological integrity requirements specific to high-risk construction sites. And the last proposed change is that we are removing rain event action plans, which are prepared by the qualified SWIP practitioner. And our logic behind this is it's been mostly just a paper exercise that required consulting time and wasn't really implemented on site. And so what we're doing is to increase involvement of our qualified stormwater professionals physically on the site by adding additional inspections and visual observations, and then kind of a more rigorous documentation and implementation of corrective actions. Alrighty. So what's next? What are the next anticipated steps? We will be hosting additional virtual workshops during a public comment period that we anticipate being in late spring 2021, as it is already spring 2021. So what we would do to initiate the public comment period is release the revised draft, and then request that the public provide comments directly to our clerk to the board or during a State Water Board hearing. And so because the permit has not been released yet, all these dates are kind of shifting a little bit later. We do plan on having a 60-day public comment period, and that's generally twice as long as we normally have. And so just because we know how extensive the reissuance is going to be, it's been 10 years since it was last updated, we decided to double the public comment period just to allow for a more in-depth review of the document, as well as more informed comments. The public comment period will close during summer of 2021, and our staff will work on responding to those comments and making any changes as necessary. And then hopefully by fall of 2021, we will move forward with an adoption meeting. So we'll put forth the revised draft in response to comments, and then propose that our board consider adoption of the state or of the construction stormwater general permit. To stay informed of where we are in the process, we encourage folks to go to our email list subscription form and click on the water quality tab and check construction stormwater permitting issues, and then fill in your contact information. And that way you'll be notified when the new draft is released and when the workshops are going to be, as well as the hearing and adoption dates. Alrighty, I know that was a lot of information. I am happy. And I tried to condense it as much as I could, and sorry if that was just kind of overbearing, but I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone may have.
All right, well, thank you very much. I almost felt like I needed a dictionary with me when you were going through this, but
Mhm.
any questions, comments from the committee? Susan?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Brandon. Nice presentation. A little long, but I was trying to track everything. Okay, is this apply what you're talking about only during the construction period or for permanent after construction? Both.
The permit is mostly for during construction. However, there are some requirements, we call them post-construction requirements, that the discharger has to comply with. And so what we try to get with the post-construction requirements is to ensure that the new development does not impact the hydrology of their watershed. So oftentimes a development's going to add a lot of impervious area. And we would therefore ask the discharger to account for all of that extra water that's running off into the receiving water. And they can do so in a variety of ways. And that's kind of where I think landscape architects may come in with low impact development and green designs as ways to infiltrate water instead of having it just run off, bioswales, etc.
I have worked on some, not a lot, of the regional water permits. I know that after construction, they do have permitting requirements for chemicals, for herbicide, pesticide, and fertilizers. Is any of this changes going to affect that? Because the Appendix H with chemicals is not in our packet.
Um,
Well, here's
I have
the
to.
reason I'm asking. In light of the rules changed or laws the last couple years, the cannabis cultivation industry is taking over large swaths of land. They're growing outside, especially up in the Golden Triangle. But we do have, I live in Campbell, we have some in San Jose and Santa Cruz. And I'm wondering, I wanted to see the list of chemicals, and has the cannabis industry things like herbicides, pesticides, even fertilizers been incorporated into this list of chemicals?
Let me think about that. And I grew up in Campbell, by the way, so that's kind of cool.
I'm on the city council.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, I grew up right off Hacienda. Let's see. To answer your question, some of these chemicals may be from cannabis related activities may be included in attachment H. It really just depends on if there is a total maximum daily load for those chemicals. And because cannabis is rather new, I would kind of assume that they haven't developed total maximum daily load requirements for specific herbicides, pesticides, and fertilizers used on cannabis sites. However, I do know that there is a cannabis order through our division here at the State Water Board that does regulate discharges from those sites. I'm not.
We do have illegal operations still, especially in the foothills of San Jose.
Yeah.
And so if you're a legal operator, you may be getting a permit, but if you're these illegal ones, it seems like this would be another way to shut them down or fine them, or to prevent them from putting chemicals into our water streams.
Right. Yeah, and I would say a lot of the illegal operations, they probably don't get this permit either. So
Well, no, but I'm saying it would be a way to fine them.
Right, yes. So if illegal operations were discovered, they can definitely be subject to minimum mandatory penalties or mandatory minimum penalties. Especially if there is a waste allocation assigned to their activities within a total maximum daily load. And so I'm sure the folks at the regional water boards or at the US EPA level who draft these total maximum daily loads are looking at the impacts of cannabis sites, and we'll eventually draft something that requires it. But it would probably be regulated through the cannabis specific permit.
Thank you.
Yeah. But going back to the post-construction standards, if say, there's a campus that develops or has low impact development and they apply fertilizers and pesticides to that, that's not really covered under this permit. It's, I think it would be more something that the city and the county would address. Because eventually that discharge is going through their system.
Or like the water district.
Or the water district, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Brandon, John Roshinsky, I have a couple of questions. Is in regards to the notice of termination,
Mm-hmm.
is that mandatory, and is it typically like the last step at the end of the construction project where they basically file this notice of termination stating that the project's completed and we've basically met all of our obligations up to that point?
Mm-hmm. That's a good way to say it. It is not voluntary, so they have to submit a notice of termination. Otherwise, they are going to have to continue complying with the requirements of the construction stormwater general permit. So most people want to file a notice of termination as fast as they can. And there are certain criteria listed in the order of the permit that the regional water boards will be looking at in the notice of termination filing or certification. And those include things like, are all disturbed soil areas stabilized? And they generally are looking for vegetation to be stable, or to be used as the stabilization. And then there's also a big focus on those post-construction stormwater requirements, just making sure that the discharger isn't running off or creating more runoff. But essentially, yes, you're demonstrating that you've complied with the permit and with those termination criteria, and that you're ready to end your coverage under the permit.
Mm-hmm. And a second question in regards to water sampling during storm events. Let's say you're a QSD or a QSP, and you've got several sites that you're monitoring, and obviously, if you've got to visit every one of them, what are the restrictions in regards to how much time you have to actually collect the stormwater and assess it and then report on that?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's kind of a lengthy answer. In the preliminary staff draft, we had a 2-hour interval between samples, and the discharger would have to collect 3 samples per day. And so that doesn't necessarily, it's not necessarily practical for a QSD or QSP who's in charge of multiple sites, because then they're stuck at one site for a long time, and they might have, up to 5 or even more. There are provisions to actually delegate sampling to trained personnel that are on site, and so the QSP would have to train the personnel, and these can be contractors, but it's preferred that it's like the superintendent or someone who's in charge of the contractors on site to make sure that they're complying with requirements. As far as reporting goes, we had a lot of feedback on the 2-hour interval. We're reducing it to 30-minute interval. So you take 3 samples every 15 minutes. So yeah, that's right. And then as far as reporting goes, the discharger is required to report within 10 days of discovering that they were above one of those numeric action levels or numeric effluent limitations. And those might be changing too, depending on the feedback that we receive. And most of our monitoring is done via field sampling. So we'll have a little pH monitor and a little turbidity monitor. But because we are including those total maximum daily load pollutants, they will actually be likely sending in samples for analysis. And so that 10-day window to report comes after they receive the results from the analytical laboratory.
Okay, thank you. And my last question is in regards to the dewatering activity requirements. Is there a threshold in regards to the amount of dewatering or discharge that triggers that requirement, or is it any dewatering at all on the site?
As currently proposed, it's any dewatering at all, because this permit regulates any discharge off the project. I believe, so something that's a little bit complicated for dewatering is that there are dewatering permits at the regional water board level. And so the regional water board permits actually take precedence over the construction stormwater general permit one. Basically what we're trying to do is cover the entire state with a construction stormwater general permit for dewatering activities, including areas in regional water boards that do not have their own permits. And some of those region-specific permits may have volume thresholds.
And would that be only if the water exits the site? I mean, like for instance, if you're clearing water out of trenches on site and it's retained on site, is there a requirement to report on this?
It might be an area where we need to clarify. I don't think there is a requirement if the water is staying on site, especially in instances where a lot of construction sites will use ponded water as dust control. You know, if they have a sedimentation basin, they'll take that water and use it as dust control, and that's authorized through this permit. So I think applications to land within the site boundary are acceptable, but applications to land past the site boundary are considered a discharge, I think.
Right, yeah. All right, thank you. Any other questions, comments?
I saw Pamela's hand go.
Pamela, yes.
Hi, thank you. And thank you, Brandon, for this presentation. A few questions. One of the things you mentioned at the very beginning was that obviously we've learned a lot, and that we all know, right? BMPs have changed and we're a lot smarter about all of this. So my question speaks to health, safety, and welfare and how we're sort of regulating that people continue with education on these BMPs and our ever-evolving knowledge on mitigation techniques. Do the engineers or geologists that can self-certify have any, like, is there anything they have to do for you to know that they're like actively involved in this sort of business prior, that they, you know, have a more intimate knowledge with this? And is there, subsequent to anyone being certified, any sort of CEUs or, you know, a conversation about ongoing training so that everybody in the state is really staying, you know, up to speed and really being the best that they can be for the public?
I'll answer that second question first because I missed a little bit of the first question. As far as CEUs and ongoing training goes, I would say there is nothing in the permit specifically regarding that. They do have to, when they're self-certifying, they do have to review these things that we call the CGP review issues. And they talk about, and these are created by the Office of Water Programs. They talk about some of the implementation challenges throughout the life of the permit. And so every time one of those pops up, I believe the self-certified individuals have to review those. And I believe that applies to non-self-certified QSDs and QSBs as well.
Okay. And by reviewing, do you mean read?
Yeah, and so these are provided online through the renewal portal, and it's just a PDF that they go through, they read, and then check that they read it, or read it. So it's not the most wholesome way to assess, but that's the process that we currently have.
Okay. So I'm safe in assuming there's no testing after you read a portion. There's not like a little test or anything that is given just to make sure you kind of read it.
You know, I actually haven't gone through that before, but for the qualified industrial stormwater practitioner certification, which I hold, there was actually a little bit of testing, I believe, during the renewal. I think there was quizzes associated with the review process. So
yeah, oftentimes there is. Yeah, if not, maybe that's something that could be applied. You know, just to make sure that people are reading what they're supposed to be reading and really staying up to date for the public's well-being. Okay, and I know Stephanie asked earlier about engineers on the water board. Are there geologists on the water board as well?
We have 5 members. I do not believe there's a geologist on the board. I think we have 2 engineers, Sean and Tam, and then Laurel, Joaquin, and Dee Dee, I believe, are more of a lawmaking background.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you. One question on the TMDLs that you excluded. Is there anything on your website or anything, you know, that we can go to look at to see what those are? Or maybe you could explain how you came about excluding them.
I'm trying to think if they are listed in attachment H, actually.
Okay.
They might be, but they also, actually, I don't think they are. I think we
Okay.
took that out because we thought it'd be too confusing.
Okay.
But I can, if you want me to follow up, I can definitely provide those to you.
That'd be great.
And essentially, how we determined that they weren't applicable is that they might have listed construction stormwater as a source, but if they didn't apply a waste load allocation, or if they didn't have any implementation requirements for construction stormwater discharges, then we decided to exclude those because the TMDL writers didn't provide us with what we were supposed to do, and that's not fair to those who have to comply with those requirements. So those discharges are just going to have to comply with the general permit requirements.
I see.
And in some instances, the TMDL or total maximum daily load did specify that compliance with the permit is sufficient. And so we kept those in there because they told us that, yes, we do want them to comply with the permit. And, you know, that's how we listed those.
Oh, I see. Okay, great. Thank you, Brandon. That helps.
And did I answer the first part of your previous question? I forgot.
Yes, you did.
Okay.
Thank you. I have just a couple more. Bear with me.
Sure. Yeah, no problem. You had to bear through my long presentation.
I have them tabbed so I can get to them easily here. Okay. You were saying, okay, so you were saying that the QSD could train a QSP and they could be on site. They could be a contractor, but they're trying not to be. So the only thing that comes up, sort of bells and whistles for me here, is like, if it is a contractor, how are they kept sort of honest in this whole like equation? And, you know, once again, it just goes back to, you know, health, safety, and welfare of the public. So that was one that kind of, you know, sort of signaled in my mind that could get a little tricky. Like, who are they really working for?
Yeah, and I've had that discussion with the construction general permit training team, and so we're trying to balance the delegation responsibility of the QSP for site personnel to make sure that the QSP is still responsible for the work that the site personnel is doing. And so kind of paired with that rescission process that I mentioned earlier, we want to make it clear to QSPs that if they are deciding not to be present on the site for everything and that they're delegating, the responsibilities, that they are taking charge of that. And so that can potentially result in them losing that certification as well. And
That makes sense.
we're trying to be
the onus
like
is on them, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, if they give it to someone that's not doing their job, it's going to come back on them ultimately.
And the CGP training team has been meeting more frequently now that the preliminary staff draft is out, and that delegation section is always under as a topic of discussion. I think what our plan is, as part of the training requirement from the QSP to the delegates, the CGP training team is going to provide a outline of what exactly the qualified SWIP practitioner has to deliver in terms of training. And then, like I said, I think we're going to also involve like the higher ranking staff at a construction site, so foremen and superintendents, to have them participate in this as well. As it can't just be, just contractors who might not have any oversight for stormwater, unless we involve those the managers at the project site.
Okay, great, thank you. And then just a quick question as it goes to reviewing from the water board. Approximately how long is it currently taking? Was it currently taking for reviews to happen? You were saying, things were delayed. Was it like 2 months, or do you know?
I think it varies, honestly. I've heard of instances where it's been like half a year.
Oh, wow.
And so,
and that was just 2020 or prior to that?
Oh, that was much prior. I mean,
okay.
It certainly depends on the regional water board. And there are the ratio of regional water board staff to construction sites is not favorable to our staff. And so I think, on any given year, there's roughly 10,000 construction sites. And so between the inspections, the report writing, and reviewing of notices of terminations, there's been a struggle to keep those balanced. And so we went to the regional water boards during one of our roundtables and essentially said, we can't keep operating like this. That's not fair to dischargers. And so they have to take action on these notices of terminations to essentially approve them. And so what I imagine is going to happen is they're going to take a brief look at the notice of terminations that have been submitted, assess which ones are higher threat to water quality, higher risk level sites, and then let the other ones just do the 30-day approval.
Okay.
And I'm sure they'll glance at them, but unless they accept them for review, then they will just get approved. And by accepting them for review, we're incorporating a process where that action ties an actual staff person's name to that report. And that way our managers at the regional water boards can say, like, hey, you're letting this one. It's basically an accountability thing. We're trying to make sure that this process is efficient.
Any chance in the foreseeable future you see your department growing to take care of the capacity of construction in the state?
We have tried through budget change proposals and whatnot. And I think at one point we asked for 44 new staff and we got 1. So
awesome.
Yes. But I mean, if there is pressure for the state to add more people, then that would help us.
Very good information to know. Thank you for that. Yes, I completely understand. That's great. Okay. Okay. So one thing I think, and John kind of touched on this, and then that's the last one I have. Okay. So if on a site, like I'm thinking about on construction sites, a lot of times there's like water machines and stuff trying to keep the dust levels down and all of that stuff. And yes, that's water that's going into, the soil and the water table potentially and all of that. But then like standing water on the side or anything, that's not covered on this? Is this once it exits the site, like property line, not necessarily going down, right?
Correct.
Right?
Yes.
Okay. And is there other regulation in the state that is taking care of it going down into the water table?
There
Yes.
are
Okay.
there are groundwater permits too.
Okay.
And so the construction stormwater general permit is an MPDS permit, which is what discharges to receiving waters of the United States. Under the California Water Code, there is waste discharge requirements, and those are to waters of the state, and waters of the state include groundwater.
Okay, perfect. I thought so much, but I just wanted to make sure. Okay, thank you. Thank you for answering all my questions. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Happy to help.
All right, any other questions, comments? All right, I know that this item had a possible action. I'm not really sure what the expectation is here. I know that Brandon, your agency is looking for comments once the permit is basically put back out for public review. So I'm going to recommend that our committee hold off on taking any further action on this until that point in time. And in all honesty, I'm not really sure what input we could really have directly on that. My thought is that probably any landscape architects that are out there that are currently certified as a QSD or QSP are probably going to be the best people to respond to this, or the industry in general. So with that, unless there's any additional thoughts from the committee in that regard, I would suggest that we just table that action until it becomes necessary or is asked for again at some future point.
I was going to mention actually during the first part of the presentation today, when we were talking about how Casqua and Office of Water Programs does value the input of landscape architects. I was wondering, and actually I asked Office of Water Programs if they had the data to tell me how many landscape architects are certified as qualified SWIP developers, and they never got back to me. So I can follow up with them and kind of figure that out. But I thought it would be important to have, or maybe prudent for the construction stormwater general permit training team to actually have a representative from the LATC. That way, we have someone who's aware of the training requirements and actively involved in that process. And that way it would better serve your licensing process as well, to make sure that we're incorporating the base knowledge that we're expecting of our qualified SWIP developers and practitioners.
Right. What type of time commitment do you think that would entail?
That is a good question. Right now we're meeting once every other month, but once the permit is adopted, it'll probably be more frequently. And those are about 2-hour work meetings. And then there's also subcommittees as part of the training team where they might meet more frequently as well. So I'd probably put it at probably a full workday each month.
Okay.
It's just to be a conservative estimate.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to ask for the other committee members your thoughts on this. It sounds like it would be an excellent opportunity to have some representation in this, but I can't obligate anybody at this point in time to, to be directly involved in that. So Any comments? Yes,
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with you and think that a presence would be very valuable. Unfortunately, at this time, I have overextended myself in some volunteer capacities, so I don't know that I could do it at this time, but maybe we can continue to talk about it and I can see how my schedule works out. But at this moment in time, I would not be able to sign up for that.
And this will be an open offer.
Mhm.
You know, you don't have to decide anyone right now or anything like that. But I'll stay in touch with Stacy, and if we, you know, find someone who would be happy to participate in the training team, we're more than welcoming them to join us.
Susan?
Yeah, I think it would be great for a landscape architect to be on the group. I'm in Pam's situation where being on council, working all that, and being on this, I've overextended myself. I don't know, is that something one of the LATC staff would be able to be on?
Well, I'm thinking that we might want to work with staff to identify maybe not necessarily someone on the committee, but someone, a licensee who is definitely very knowledgeable in this that could represent the committee in that regard. I'd rather have somebody that really knows what they're dealing with and the language and everything else than trying to get up to speed on all this.
Mhm.
This is
Pam, I don't know, you sound like the best person.
Oh, well, I don't know about that. I just ask a lot of questions. I don't know if that really qualifies me or not. I do have an interest in it, though. I do know several people that one person recently getting a degree in this that is a landscape architect, not specifically in this topic, but in civil related education, and also some people that are landscape architects inside the Bureau of Engineering in the city of LA that might also be able to be a strong advocate for landscape architects. So I think there definitely are people within our profession, obviously, as John suggested. So yeah, I think it would be good for us to continue to talk internally about this and see
Right.
see how we could help Brandon out a little bit.
Mm-hmm. And help ourselves out.
Yes, help ourselves and mostly the public, and especially, you know, if there's a problem with getting around to sites and all of that, you know, by opening it up to landscape architects more, that gives more resources and just makes the whole situation flow a little bit more seamlessly, hopefully. And you know, I would advocate that there are many of us that are licensed landscape architects that are truly capable of you know, being a QSP in this circumstance. So, but that's something that we can address during our comment period, I would assume.
Mm-hmm.
Right, because I was going to say, you know, depending how this permit is renewed and implemented, I could see where it might have some big implications on green infrastructure and that would be something that would definitely be of concern, that we make sure that all licensees are up to speed on all of those issues.
Mm-hmm. There's also the Casqua construction subcommittee, so I don't know if there are many landscape architects who are members of Casqua, the California Stormwater Quality Association, but that committee also is another avenue that our regulated community can provide feedback through, because they work with us as well. And so many members of the Casqua construction committee are on the training committee as well. Yeah.
Good to know. Yeah. All very important.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, if there's no more questions or comments from the committee, I'll open it up to the public. for any questions, comments?
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the chair, I have opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment, please click that Q&A icon at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen. I'll go ahead and pause a moment to allow the public time to access the Q&A panel and submit their requests. Oh, and I also see that Trish Rodriguez has her hand raised. I don't know if she wants to make a comment.
I just wanted to say that I could work with John following the meeting and possibly with ASLA to see if we want to appoint a subcommittee to work on this.
All right, this is the moderator, and it looks like there are no requests for public comment. Would you like me to close that Q&A feature?
Yes, please.
All right.
All right. Brandon, thank you very much. I think we got more than what we asked for, but it's always good to have as much information as we can. So with that, we look forward to continuing to work with you and your agency and hopefully we'll have some good input here in the future in that regard.
Great, thank you. I'm always happy to be here. And feel free to write with any questions or clarifications that you would like me to respond to, and I'll get to it. But I am very busy right now.
Oh, sure. All right.
I'll try and respond to those as best as I can.
All right. Thank you very much.
All righty. Take care.
All right. I guess we will move on to item K. Discuss some possible action on 2019-21 strategic plan objectives to research the need for continuing education for licensees through the LATC, the American Society of Landscape Architects, or another organization to better protect health, safety, and welfare of consumers. And with that, I will ask Trish to make that presentation.
This actually, Stacy worked on this item. It's a follow-up from our last meeting. So she's done an extensive amount of work. I'm going to go ahead and have her present this item right now.
All right.
Okay, this is Stacy. So at the last meeting, it was kind of decided to, there was a motion and then it was withdrawn and it was kind of decided to table it. So I've included all of the information that was presented at the December meeting, but I also included some additional information. So just some background, in 2008, the California Architects Board was mandated by Senate Bill 1608 to require architects to complete 5 hours of continuing education on disability access requirements prior to the renewal of their license. And then most recently, the American Institute of Architects California was sponsoring the Assembly bill to require architects to obtain 5 hours of CE in zero net carbon design. At the board's December 11th, 2020 meeting, there was additional discussion of the CE requirements in the zero net carbon design for architects, which concluded with the board in support of the AIA California's proposal. Most recently, the American Society of Landscape Architects Sierra chapter contacted LATC requesting that a discussion begin regarding requiring the addition of a CE requirement for landscape architects to ensure that the licensed professionals would be current with the latest code and industry updates. Through my research, I found that 39 out of the 52, or 75% of registration boards for landscape architecture require licensees to complete CE for license renewal, and all of the continuing education registration boards require a minimum number of hours in health, safety, and welfare of the public. And then the remaining required hours can be comprised of other topics related to the profession. So it's just kind of at the discretion of the landscape architect. At the December 2nd, 2020 meeting, the committee members expressed the need for additional research on continuing education in other landscape architecture jurisdictions. There was also interest expressed in knowing what regulations have recently changed and the fiscal and time impact CE requirements would have on staff. So even though there was no motion, I still did that additional research and found the majority of landscape architect registration boards that do require CE made the decision as a board. There was a legislative mandate requiring CE for 7 of the registration boards. And all decisions to require CE of landscape architects were to ensure the health, safety, and welfare of the public. And at this time, it would be difficult to determine the fiscal and time impact of requiring CE for our licensees that it would have on staff. But factors would include whether LATC would approve courses and or providers, the auditing licensees for compliance, and enforcement of non-compliance. And then I just wanted to compare to the board. So the LATC workload would continue throughout the year since our licensees renew their license just throughout the year, whereas the board, they renew every odd year. So most of their continuing education compliance and checks are in every odd years. They still have some occasionally in even years if they do get a renewal or recycle, but the bulk of it is in odd years, whereas with LATC, it would just be continuous. And then additionally, in the past 5 years, there's only been one statutory change, and that would be the Business and Professions Code, Section 5616, regarding contract requirements, which was amended effective January 1st, 2021. However, there are the proposed amendments that would affect the practice of landscape architecture, such as BPC Section 5659, which hopefully will go through in 2022. And California Code of Regulations Section 2671, the public presentments and advertising requirements. So I just presented most of the information again that was presented in December. So for your information to review and then decide if there is a need for continuing education. I know that at the December meeting, it was requested that we reach out to BPLSG because they do not require CE. And I did reach out to the Assistant Executive Officer. She said to her, as far as she knew, continuing education has never been a requirement for professional engineers or land surveyors. And in the 30+ years that she's been with the board, there has been several professional societies that reached out to them asking the board to require CE. But the board could never justify requiring it since national studies performed for various professions showed no correlation between requiring continuing education and a reduction in complaints / enforcement actions. They did say that the board does encourage their licensees to maintain their professional competency by remaining current on any changes, and whether that's through continuing education or professional development, but it's not a requirement due to them not being able to justify it. So that's all the information's there for you to discuss.
Okay. Gee, where do we begin?
Yeah.
All right, I'll open it up for thoughts, comments, questions from the committee.
This is Andy. One of my initial comments, I think, from last time was that while I think we all can maybe agree that continuing education is a good idea, in order to say it's going to be mandated makes it that I would think there would have to be a demonstrated need. So I guess I would come back to, do we have complaints that have been filed against landscape architects in certain areas of practice that might lead us to believe that we need continuing education in certain aspects of our profession? So that's question number one. Question number two would be, our our scope of practice is so broad, but as far as any kind of restrictions or newer directions that we've been provided from legislature, has more to do with MWELO. And so I could see that if there was some continuing education required for MWELO, I think that would maybe be something that we could discuss and see if that is something that we feel would be necessary for continuing education. I don't support the idea of just blanketly saying, well, okay, continuing education, just self-directed, do whatever. I've been looking at this list of states that have that, where it's just like, well, we're not going to tell you what you have to take. It just has to deal with, different aspects of the profession to protect the health, safety, welfare, which is kind of a broad statement. Who is going to say that that's the correct way to do it without stating specifically what that needs to entail? So that's my opinion on it anyway.
Pamela?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I do feel strongly that I think our profession should have CEUs. I do also agree with Andy in that I think if we are to take this stand, that it needs to be a little more than just health, safety, welfare, broad, descriptive, and really look at practicing within our state. What are the significant issues that we feel the landscape architect should be educated on? And I think that MWELO is a very good one. Stormwater mitigation, resiliency against natural disasters, including fires, and the larger storms that are coming in off the ocean. I think all of those could be topics that we could consider necessary and changing. I mean, I think that's one thing that we could also look at, that BMPs and what people are learning about forest fires or regenerative practices, or all of that. That's really not necessarily something new, but new technologies come about, and really making sure that if you want to carry a license, that you are doing due diligence to be at what I think all of us would assume to be that level of expertise. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Susan?
Yes, thank you. I do agree with some of the things that were said by both Andrew and Pamela. I am strongly supporting having continuing education. And regarding the fact that we are such a broad profession, I think some of you have heard me discuss that we should potentially be looking at subcategories the way the civil engineers have, because we have landscape architects that do nothing but residential garden design. And then we have other landscape architects like myself that go sit before the state architects and have to be extremely versed in ADA or submit to the cities for public work projects. So I agree with Pam in that if we limit it to the certain categories, the ones she mentioned, I agree with the fire management, MWELO, resiliency, ADA. I can't tell you how many landscape architects that I talk to that don't know enough beyond 2% slope and the size or the slope of a ramp. So I am in strong support of this, and I think right now what our staff is asking us is if we want to perform the study, right? Stacy, you're asking us to, if I look at what the action item is here. So we're asking you to research and determine how we do this, right?
Well, and to determine if there's a need for continuing education. So, I mean, I know there's a lot of support for it, but we need to be able to justify the need for it.
So I don't know, John mentioned, or maybe Andrew, about how many citations or complaints. There are so few as a whole on everything that I would think that it should not be okay, well, we had 10 complaints, it's justified. I would be looking at all this legislation. I mean, we had a ton of things today, stormwater, BMPs, legislation. ADA is a huge one. MWELO to me is another big one. And I think if you looked into what the minimum qualifications are to pass the test versus what is actually required, say, to submit a drawing on a public work project to a city, that might be ways to justify the extra education.
Mhm. Pamela?
Is it sufficient to say that the climate of landscape architecture being ever changing, with stormwater resiliency and regenerative practices in play in today's world, that would be enough to constitute a vote for CEUs? Or is there some other really data-driven direction that we have to take, Stacy?
I'm not entirely sure on that. This is my first research into any CE. So I mean, I guess really it would just depend on if we can justify it enough to get it approved. I mean, if we do the statute get approved by legislature, or if we, go regulations route, get approved by OL. So
Okay.
I mean, that's where we're at.
Okay. And we would need to write some sort of statement on behalf of that, proving that there was a need, correct?
Yeah, in order to justify it, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Can I say something here just real quick?
Yeah, go ahead, Andy.
About MWELO. We've all said that, having continuing education on MWELO might be a good idea, but something comes to mind on that, though, is that, MWELO changes a little bit from year to year, or whenever it is they get together and decide that they're going to make a change to it, since it was first adopted in 2015. But once you've learned it, you've learned it. So it's like learning to drive a car. Once you took driver's training and you took the behind the wheel test, you don't need to do that again. So, when we're saying continuing education, that means that we're mandating to our licensee population that over a 2-year period, they're going to have to take so many hours, of instruction of whatever it happens to be. So, are we going to require 5 hours of education every 2 years to retake MWELO? Learn how to do irrigation calculations and things like that. I mean, once you've done it, you've done it. So that doesn't necessarily seem to me to be exactly what the purpose of continuing education. So, continuing education is continuing to be educated on certain things. So, which I would think would involve not relearning something, it would be learning something new. So, I think we would have to be a little bit careful about what we're going to be trying to achieve with this, with the continuing education, because something else that comes to mind is we have a licensee population that consists of a lot of older practitioners who have been practicing for a very long time. And now all of a sudden you're going to tell that older population, oh, by the way, now we're going to tell you that you have to go back basically and get this continuing education in order to maintain your license. I think that we might get some pushback from that side of the coin. Mm-hmm. Maybe the younger practitioners were more, out of school recently, might not see that as that much of a big deal. But I would think the older ones who've been practicing for 40 plus years might have a little bit of an issue with it. Not that we're doing it for their benefit or anybody's benefit. We're doing it for the protection of the health, safety, and welfare of the public, and understanding that. But this is going to have an impact on all the entire licensee population. So we need to be sure about the topics that we want them to go get education on, if that makes sense. I might not have stated that correctly, but you get the gist of what I'm trying to say. So, but
Susan?
Go ahead.
I didn't know if Andrew was done.
Well, what I was going to say, I didn't mean to, wasn't trying to repeat myself, but, again, when you look at the states, they're just saying, well, just willy-nilly take whatever classes that you think that you want, as long as it's in health, safety, and welfare, that's going to meet our requirement. I don't think that's what we're trying to achieve here. To me, that's just kind of silly to mandate something like that. So if there's a strong perceived need for continuing education in a topic, then I'm all for it. Then that's what we should do. And if it's something that is going to change continuously, and so you do need to stay up on it, then great. Then we should be supporting that. But we're not trying to say go get continuing education just for the heck of continuing education. That's where I think you're going to get some pushback.
Right. My basic thoughts on this are, number one, is the supplemental exam robust enough that it's really covering these areas that we feel are really important to establish minimum competency by our licensees to begin with. And I don't see how you address the CE issue without looking at that supplemental exam to begin with. And secondly, it seemed to be just based on the statistics that it was only about a quarter of the other states that require CEs, that it was actually a legislative action that mandated that versus the boards just deciding that that's what they wanted. And I agree with Andy in that although it's important to encourage our licensees to stay up to date in all these different various areas, I'm not sure that we can really mandate that. Just simply because, as Susan pointed out, the profession is so diverse that many of our licensees may never even be involved in any of the type of work that we're asking them to go out and be involved with. So in that regard, I think we need to continue this discussion, but specifically how we tailor that discussion, I think I'm not really sure how we proceed on that.
I would think that seeing as how the Sierra chapter of ASLA that brought this to the LATC, that we asked them if they had any specifics as to which items that they felt that continuing education, the landscape architects would benefit from, continuing education, not just a course. We're talking about continuing the education of the landscape architect population every 2 years. So
right.
if there's something that's going to change that frequently. I do think, John, that you did bring up a very good point, and that is those of us who are the older practitioners in the state who we didn't have to take a CSE. I took an oral exam, after I passed the UNE, but I didn't have to take a California supplemental exam. So I couldn't even really tell you what specifically is on that exam if I were to be asked. So, there may be some things that are on that exam that older practitioners have never been tested on. So that might be something that might be worth, taking a look at and seeing if that's got a benefit to it. Not that I'm saying that, we should just, again, be testing just for the hell of testing. But again, we're trying to protect the health, safety, and welfare and making sure that everybody is more up to date as to what the current standards are, which if you were never tested on it to begin with, then you're just trusting that whatever your scope of practice happens to contain, that you've been doing it correctly, which isn't
Right.
necessarily true. So again, I'm doing a lot of talking here. Maybe I should be quiet for a second and let other people.
I'd like to chime in.
Yeah, Susan.
So before I got on this committee, I participated in writing the questions and reviewing the test exams. And 2 of the times I went in, there were 2 people freshly out of school and 4 or 5 of us that were old timers. The old timers barely passed the test if we even got a 60% score, because there were so many new things that the kids, or I should not say kids, the young adults that came right out of college, they were asking biodiversity questions and ADA questions beyond the basics. And the older ones of us all laughed a little bit and said, oh my God, if I had to get licensed right now, I would never pass the test. And so to me, the argument about people that have been licensed a long time justifies, say, things like ADA and resiliency. I do know, and I'm pretty sure, or I should say I know, I'm pretty sure now that the architects require their architects to have an ADA class. And I know we have an architect on the call here, but one of my friends is, and she said, oh, I have to take the mandatory ADA class because of all the new regulations that are in there. So to me, stuff like that would justify it. But I think what they're asking us right now is, should they even proceed beyond this point? And John, you mentioned keep the dialogue going. And so that's what I am in favor of, is let's do a little more research. So maybe the architect, who's, I forget his first name, Tien, is it?
Yes, Tien.
Yeah, Tien, sorry, this is Trish. Tien had to leave the meeting early, so he's not on the call right now.
But I'm pretty sure they now have a required ADA class, so that would be something that you could check on.
This is Laura. I can tell you that architects do have 5 hours in disability access continuing education every 2 years, but it is a requirement that was not requested by the board or by the industry. It was imposed by other forces through legislation, and similar to how the proposal going forward this year for an additional 5 hours, that's coming from the profession. And so I would say it's more common for an association to push forward for continuing education than it is for the licensing program itself. So just a note for something for you to consider.
So what you're saying, it would be more something through ASLA or some other similar organization versus legislation?
Yeah, it's more typical that it would be the association that's pushing for it. As you know, like a licensing program, we license for a minimum level of competency. And so continuing education is often seen as a way to elevate the profession beyond that minimum level of competency. So they don't necessarily, from a consumer protection organization, it doesn't necessarily go together.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess I'll make a motion, if I can do that as chair, to give some further direction to staff. What I'd like to see, as Andy suggested, is that we reach out to the Sierra chapter in particular, but I think it wouldn't hurt to go out to the other chapters in the state to specifically kind of query them in regards to what they see as the critical need for this, or why they think there's a critical need for CEs. And the second part of my motion would be, I think, as Andy has also stated, it would be nice to have kind of an assessment, specifically here to California, of any enforcement issues that have come up around specific areas of practice, something like that. And maybe we could go back out to some of the other jurisdictions and query them, asking basically the same question. Is there a particular reason or some association with a particular CE that they're looking for in regards to any enforcement issues or public health and safety issues that they're identifying? And there's a third thing here, and being one of those older practitioners, unfortunately, I've lost my train of thought. But I would say that again, maybe what we do is with the work that OPES is going to be doing for us in regards to looking at the supplemental exam and changes that might be warranted in that we utilize that process to kind of take a close look at specific areas of practice that might fit into this discussion as far as that goes.
John, I'll second your motion, but that has to be one of the longest motions I've ever heard. So someone who deals with these all the time, that was a long one. So I'll second your motion.
All right. Any discussion on that?
Well, I don't know if it's a discussion on the actual motion itself, but I would think somewhere in there we'd have to, and whether it be another vote or another motion after this is voted on, and that would be the number of CE hours required and over what period of time. So we've just heard that, 5 hours, I guess, biennially for the architects, for their, access specialists for the ADA. So, and then who are we saying is, where do you get this instruction from? I know at the very last page of Stacy's thing, it gives the, wherever it was, the continuing education providers. But just because they're the providers doesn't mean that they actually offer course content on what it is that we're saying that we want instruction on.
Right.
They have their own instructions, as they have their instructors and they have course content of certain things. And I don't know if it's something we pick and choose from what they already have, or if we have them develop a whole new, program just for us for certain things.
Right.
So yeah, those would all be things that I would think would have to be discussed, whether it be, and obviously it's not a part of this motion, but before we could go much further, we'd have to have that level of discussion. But I agree. I think we need to go to ASLA, go to CCASLA and ask them for specifics as to what they feel that maybe we're deficient in as far as education of landscape architects.
Right. And I want to amend my motion. And the part 2 where involved going to the chapters, and I agree. I think probably going to CCSLA would be more direct, but I'm curious if it wouldn't be possible to put out some type of survey to our licensees to just ask them, are you taking CE somewhere? I mean, even though it's not required here, they might be licensed in other states that require it, or maybe they're just taking classes in general because they think it's in areas that they need to keep up on, just to kind of get a general feel for where they're seeking additional education to keep their practice up, and where are they going you know, what types of providers are they looking for that? Because if we do move forward with this, that's a question that we're going to have to ask anyway. So what
as your seconder on your motion, I'll accept your amendment to the motion, but I would pare it down a little and just say,
okay.
reach out to the board, reach out to licensed professionals and provide questions for them or a survey for them.
Right, and I have a question for Trish. As far as staff goes, do you think that putting together a survey such as what I've suggested is doable?
Yes. Yeah, we have a mailing list we could send out. I can work with you on putting the specific questions together for the survey.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right.
If I can say something in regards to the survey, I think we need to keep in mind that it's less about preference of our licensees and more about the public safety and welfare. And perhaps not get into the weeds about where they find their continuing education just yet until we're kind of at that bridge.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think there's a couple of hurdles that we need to get over first. But I think your thought about reaching out to the boards, and I think subsequently CCASLA, because they have a delegate from each chapter, so you're touching each chapter through the advocacy arm. They could bring that to the XCOM board meetings, and thus get a written statement.
Mm-hmm.
That they could then compile together through CCASLA, and then we'd be receiving one sort of consolidated view. I can say, having sat on the board as president last year and continuing as past president this year, that it is a discussion that has a pretty good thumbs up from the board. However, they are not necessarily of the LATC charge, and not necessarily looking at this from a health, safety, welfare, although it does enter the purview for a lot, just for the obvious reasons that, someone could go and hire landscape architect A and landscape architect B, and have, landscape architect B could be way up on their education and all of this, and the other person not so much. And there's really no way for the public to discern that without continuing education requirements.
Right.
Yeah. I'd like to add, and I don't know if this has to be part of your motion, but the pass rate on these tests are down in the 60s, 70%. And I don't know if it could be made available, but it'd be interesting to see what questions people are not passing. For instance, if they have a biodiversity question or a fire management question. I don't know. I know we can't get the actual question, but if we could get a general sense of what people are not passing. I don't know if that has to be a motion or just feedback to staff.
Well, I think that would be part of the existing motion, where we're looking at the supplemental exam, which I think is kind of tied in with the national exam and the questions that are being asked there. So,
okay.
Yeah. I know this is a very complicated subject, and I think it's just going to take a lot more effort to really kind of get through it. But
I agree, and I think we need to take the time. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So I would say public comment.
I was just going to make one more comment. I know that we've got a strategic planning session that'll be happening in November, And this is going to be part of the discussion during that. So I would say let's give it the forethought and the research that's really necessary to be able to effectively address that during that process. I think probably the most important part of this is going to be, again, reaching out to our licensees to get a sense for where they're currently going for continuing education. And I think as far as the supplemental exam and the third part, which or maybe the first part, which I've completely forgotten now what that was. That I think both of those are kind of more to stuff that we're dealing with already as far as the committee goes.
So there's a motion on the table. Are we voting on the motion, or are we restating the motion, or what are we doing?
We have to have public comment.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think what the motion is primarily to provide staff additional information on where we would like them to go next. And hopefully they're not too confused at this point, but yeah, I guess with that, if our discussion is done, I'll open it up to public discussion before we proceed with a vote.
All right, this is the moderator, and at the direction of the chair, I have opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a public comment, please click that Q&A icon at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen, and it looks like we do have one request for public comment. Individual identified as Tracy Morgan Hollingworth. I will be unmuting your microphone now.
Hi, just wanted to weigh in on the continuing ed discussion. In San Diego, we tried to partner with our AIA chapter to do the 5-part, requirement that the architects have. There were 2 sections of that ADA, which really were very applicable to landscape architecture, but the other 3 sections were not at all applicable. So we did 2 of them, but we got a really great, show up. We had almost 30 members, and we're a small chapter. And I love the instructor. He said, okay, you're all 20 and 30-year-olds, but guess what? You're going to be designing for your future. And they all looked around. Yeah, they all looked around the room and they went, "Oh boy." I think you're right. So I think it's worthwhile to see. There are a lot of instructors out there that dove in. They had at least 5 that are qualified already at the ASLA level to teach this, what is more of an architect's continuing ed, but I think it'd be worthwhile. Just FYI.
All right, and it looks like there are no further requests for public comment. Would you like me to close that Q&A feature?
Yes, please.
Right.
All right. I guess with that, I will call for a vote, but I would like whoever was recording the motion, was that you, Trish?
I would have to listen to the recording again. It was
Okay.
pretty long and kind of stopped and restarted. So I did my best. You could just perhaps refer as stated, or I don't know if Michael, did you want us to clarify what the motion is, or could we just refer to as discussed?
This is Michael. I think if you have what you need. What you got, I think, was a lot of suggestions there in terms of where we want to go next, and sort of ratifying that discussion, I think is fine in terms of a motion. If you think you have what you need in terms of reaching out to licensees, reaching out to ASLA, and some of the other thoughts.
Mhm.
Okay, I'll use the recording to make sure I capture it correctly, John, and work with you to finalize it in the minutes.
Right, and I think it should be fairly easy to whittle that down to a few
Okay.
real
10
basic
pages down-
statements.
From 10 pages down to 2 pages.
Yeah.
John breaks the record on the longest motion, so.
Yeah, really.
All right. Well, I will call for a vote on the motion and the second as made. And so with that,
Sorry, this is Trish. I didn't hear the second. Was there,
Me.
who was this? Okay, sorry.
Susan was the second, yes.
Okay.
And so to direct staff per the motion as made, Andy Bowden,
Aye.
Pamela Brief,
Aye.
Susan Landry,
Aye.
and John Roshinsky, aye. So the motion passes unanimously. All right. I think if I'm not mistaken, that pretty much finishes everything that was on the agenda for today. I'll open it up to the committee if they have any last thoughts or anything before we adjourn.
Yeah,
Trish?
I would like to just
Oh.
thank the staff for all the hard work that they do. These documents and packages are quite extensive. They do a lot of research. They're very well written. So I just want to give a kudos to staff. And also, John, you're doing a continuing great job as our chair.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Susan. I just wanted to just quickly go back to the future meeting dates. The next board meeting is June 11th. I don't think we identified if a committee member would be attending that. And if so, who might that be?
Let's see, that's on a Friday. I can attend that. And I guess would encourage any other committee members that are maybe interested to as well.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm assuming that will be a virtual meeting again.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Trish, a question for you. Do you normally ask for a commitment on that, like at the LATC meeting prior?
Normally, yes.
Yeah, okay.
If you know ahead of time for any of the other meetings, and you're nothing to prohibit you from attending,
Okay,
but if you
yeah.
would like to volunteer for any of them, just let us know, and we could actually indicate that at the time that it's discussed.
Okay. On the one that says 9th through 10th, is that a 2-day meeting?
That's the board's, they'll have a 1 day of meeting and the next day strategic planning.
Okay.
Ours, we have been able to do it 1 day, but I will assess what the agenda might look like. And if it seems like it's going to have a number of items, ours in November could possibly be a 2-day meeting, but we've recently been able to do it both the meeting in the morning and strategic planning in the afternoon. What's helped us is that the board has their strategic planning beforehand, and so although I accumulate ideas over the prior strategic plan period, we also try to align with what they might come up with. So it does assist us in developing ours a little more quickly.
Okay. Okay. I am available on that September date if you need somebody to be there from our group. I'm out of town on the 11th, maybe.
Okay.
for the first time in a very, very long time.
Yeah,
So,
really.
Thank you. I'll make a note.
okay, thank you.
Trish, I have a really quick question. If CLARB ends up holding their annual meeting in person, when is that supposed to take place?
Yeah, they only identified the months, not a specific dates yet. They actually don't even have the location narrowed down. I think it was Phoenix. I forget the other city. So it's definitely going to be in Arizona. One of the things they last mentioned was possible hybrid, where they would have in person as well as virtual attendance. So they're trying to flush that out right now and are hoping to let us know here relatively soon.
So they don't have a specific date set
No.
for that yet?
Not
Okay.
yet.
Okay. All right. If there's no further comments or anything, I will adjourn the meeting, and I have 2:35. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, everybody.
Thank you.